Dale City and Southbridge, Dumfries, and Point South.
Good morning. I'm coming out of the church.
95, 395, looking good as well. Bloomberg 99.1 3-day forecast today. Clouds, but high around 70 degrees. Sunday, partly cloudy, and after a morning high near 70, the temps will steadily fall through the afternoon. And Monday, clouds with a high of 55 expected. Right now, mostly cloudy at 59 degrees in Washington, D.C. Divisional round of the NFL playoffs today. Minnesota Vikings at San Francisco kickoff at 4:35. And tonight, it's the Ravens hosting the Titans 8:15 kickoff from Baltimore. Mike Franciotti, Bloomberg 99.1.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly from Bloomberg Radio.
According to one source, Catholic Church leaders paid out about $750 million from the early 1980s through 2002. And yet, Jason, as this story in the magazine explores, America's Catholic churches are shifting assets and they're filing for Chapter 11. It's all about avoiding the paying out of more money to settle sex abuse claims.
It is an incredibly disturbing story, but a very, very important one, and really takes us into the inner workings of the church and the business-like way that they have approached this. Editor Dan Ferrara joins us. He worked on this story very closely. Took a long time to sort of get all this reporting out. Josh Saul wrote this story. Dan, take us in here and help us understand the sort of broad strokes before we dive into the details.
Well, the churches, they declare bankruptcy because sex abuse claims are going to overwhelm them, right? And declaring bankruptcy is probably the appropriate thing to do. The way they explain it is, like, if we declare bankruptcy, it creates an order to the process. Imagine if they didn't do that, and then the first big claim could wipe them out, and no other victims would have access to any money.
Right.
So that makes sense on that level, like, you declare bankruptcy. What the story is also examining, however, is steps that precede the bankruptcy, and that the church says are not about anticipating the bankruptcy, but steps that precede the bankruptcy, which diminish the size of the church's estate. So bankruptcy will typically, there's no hard and fast rule, but if a bankruptcy ends up, if sex abuse victims end up splitting half the church's remaining estate, then the church has an interest in minimizing the size of that estate.
Dan, and this is what's interesting, and I think most people listening, I think about, corporate America, right? You know, people file, Chapter 11 so that there is an order to the process, and so that, creditors or as many creditors are given, a bite of the pie that's
right. And these
left
sex
out.
abuse victims, in fact, are creditors. That's their status,
so
legal status.
So we understand that, but as this story so well, points out, that there's two points to it, and the big thing is these assets that are transferred and reclassified. And you talk about these archdioceses, right, that move these assets to parishes, and so that money is no longer part of that settlement pool.
Right.
It's legal.
Yep.
But tell us a little bit more about that.
It's legal, but it is in fact what is in dispute in bankruptcy proceedings.
Okay.
Like, the churches will say that certain assets, like funds of money, real estate is the single largest one. So that doesn't actually belong to the archdiocese. That belongs to the individual parishes, and therefore it's not legitimately part of the estate. Well, in a lot of instances, the money was moved from the archdiocese to the individual parishes in anticipation of or preceding the bankruptcy.
Right, and that's
right.
the
So
point,
then
in terms of the timing. It used to be part of the archdiocese, and then it's moved off.
So the lawyers are trying to, representing the victims, are trying to drag those same properties back into the archdiocese estate.
Because the lawyers on the other side are essentially arguing that the church did this in anticipation of these very lawsuits and are seeking to minimize the estate.
They're definitely seeking, yes, that's definitely an argument that they're making. And whether or not they say he did it in anticipation of it, they are saying, like, let's be realistic about who actually controls these things. So they may be in the name of the parish, but if the archdiocese has control, then they said that represents ownership.
I feel like, so many things were going through my head when I was reading the story. I was thinking about, a couple that gets divorced, right? And, one of the partners moves assets before they start to go through divorce proceedings, so that that's not considered part of the marital assets. Like, it almost feels like, to that extent,
That's an analogy that one of the victims used, right? Because it happened in his own life.
Well, there's one stat in the story, and I think Bloomberg Business Week actually did a review of court court filings by lawyers for churches, Catholic churches, and victims